I love a good adventure story, where the main character finds themselves in a strange land and meets with strange characters and has to overcome obstacles and maybe learn something before they can find their way back home. Think Alice down the rabbit hole and finding herself in Wonderland, or think Dorothy getting swept up in that tornado and ending up in Oz. Well, this is a story that is much like those. Ben will head down a path only to discover it leads him away from his life and into a whole nother world. A world where he will encounter weeds with roots that are 30 feet long, magic seeds that turn into something else when needed, a giant woman whose favorite snack is human, though she doesn't really like the hairy ones, a gruff little blue crab who will become his traveling companion, horrible monsters, man-sized bugs, creatures made of smoke that can choke the life out of you, and taloned and winged beasts who can end your life very easily, sometimes just by looking at you, and a Spanish explorer from the 15th century who will become one of his most precious friends. And all the while, all Ben wants is to get back to his wife and his children. But if he does manage to get back, what will be left there for him after he's been gone for all these decades? So if you're interested in hearing the whole story, join me for the ride. Okay, our main character is Ben. Ben is a businessman. I don't really know anything beyond that in terms of what he does for a living, but I do know that he's a businessman because he has driven from Maryland to the Poconos in Pennsylvania to meet with someone to have a business dinner at this hotel. He's checking in, he's spending the night, and when he gets to the little hotel outside the Poconos, with hours to spare before his meeting, when he checks in, the girl behind the counter does two strange things. First, she hands him a key. A real key. Like a metal key that fits in a lock and turns, like, not a card, not something electronic, but an actual key. And then, when Ben asks about hiking trails in the area, she looks confused and says, "There aren't any hiking trails around here." In the middle of Pennsylvania, near the Poconos? Are you kidding? This is where hiking paths live. He decides to look for a path anyway, and he quickly finds one. In fact, when he finds a sign indicating the path, he has an urge to rip it up from the ground and take it back to the hotel to show the girl at the desk. At one point, there becomes a small split in the path, and he takes out his phone and he marks down the details of the area so he can be sure to find his way back. When he gets to the end of the path, where it loops around and heads back, he notices that there are ATV tracks headed in the other direction. Checking on the time, he decides to follow the tracks. They split off into a fork, and one way seems to lead towards a country road without sidewalks, so Ben takes the other path, the one that leads away from the neighborhood and further into the woods. As the path gets quieter and quieter, he realizes that all the McMansions are gone. He truly is in the forest now, which is when he notices a man ahead of him. What is that man doing? Is he pulling the dead body of a small dead body out of a hut? Oh my God, that has to be the body of a small child. I mean, that's a young girl, but her feet are gone. The man looks up, sees Ben, and begins to head towards him. Ben cannot see what the man looks like because he is wearing the face skin of a dead Rottweiler. This dog-face man brandishes a large knife. This large man starts chasing Ben, and when Ben starts to run, all he can think is, "Oh my God, please, knee, don't fail me." The man in the mask is about 20 yards behind him. When he checks again, he's 30 yards away. But it's then that another man, also in a Rottweiler-skinned face, appears ahead of him. Because Ben had been on the football team when he was in high school, he was a fullback, in fact. His mind told him to run right into the man. And it worked. It worked better than Ben could ever have hoped for. But when he was finally safe, he looked around and could see no signs of civilization, no McMansions, no homes at all, not a single man-made structure. Nothing. Just wilderness. So being a man of the modern age, he took out his cell phone. But there was only one dot, which was not enough to connect him to the world. He began to shout for help, but there was no one to hear him. And he realized he was scared, really scared. He felt like maybe those dog-faced men were still around somewhere. The memory of the girl's mutilated body pushed him to run faster, hopefully in the right direction. He decides he couldn't have gone that far, so he heads up the mountain to get an idea of the lay of the land. Maybe he would be able to see his hotel, And then he starts to think, am I really awake? Am I actually experiencing this right now? Thinking about the dogmen, he starts to climb to the peak, not gracefully, but he does successfully get up there. Now that he's above, he can see that, his hotel is nowhere to be seen. Ben has a pretty decent sense of direction, and he knew the way his hotel was, but there's nothing. And not only that, but the topography of the land around him is quite different from that of the Poconos, where he had checked into his hotel. He found a path, and then he began along it, reminding himself that if he stops, the two dog-faced men would probably catch up and cut him up. So, he's a little on edge, which is fair. It's excellent motivation, even though his body was reminding him just how old he was, and his knee was extremely angry. He was panting, and his feet were very worn out, but that memory kept him moving forward. So the compass app on his phone worked without a signal, and he found that the dogmen were to the west, so he decided to walk to the east until he found something. I totally support this plan of attack. The battery on his phone was dying, so he did the one thing he never ever thought he would do. He powered down his cell phone. He finds a path and hopes it will lead to something, anything, because the sun is about to set, and he's walking the path having found nothing to assist him. But around the bend, he finds a campfire and a tent, and Ben's heart leaps. There could be people here. Real, not covered in the skins of dog face people. He calls out for help, but no one seems to hear him. He looks at the tent, a small pump tent, only big enough for 2 people. There's a cooler, and when no one responds to it, he dives in for a water bottle. And after drinking it, it occurs to him just how hungry he is. Lovesick for food, hungry is how he describes it. The backpack that is at the campsite has a couple of potato rolls, some beef jerky, and he eats it all. Worries about deciding to spend the night in the tent, but he knew that he needed rest. There was no way he could continue the way he was. The sun is about to set. He's really going to need to sleep here. Powered on his cell phone, took a look at some of the videos and pictures he had of him and his family. And then a bar appeared. A bar appeared! He quickly called home, and his wife answered. Ben? Ben? Oh my God, Teresa, I'm lost, he says. And then the call drops. And now there are no bars. In fact, the battery was red. And as he tried to get his wife back, all that appeared on his cell phone was the image of a charge cord and a battery, signaling it was time to get a new charge. He resigns himself to sleeping at this campsite, in this small little pub tent. He wishes he didn't have to, but it's gone dark now, and he'd never find his way. And even though he's worried he won't be able to sleep, he finds himself waking up at 3 a.m., which means he clearly fell asleep. He can hear the sound of someone strumming a guitar, and curiosity gets the best of him. When he first sees her, he rushes into asking for help. I need to get back to my wife and kids. I'm lost out here, But instead, he stops short, and he recognizes this woman strumming her guitar. He knew her. He knew her in college, way back. But no, it's not way back. He doesn't have a wife. He doesn't have kids. He's a college student himself. One look at his pristine knee with no surgery marks on it proves it's true. He and the girl chat, hang out, and end up in the pump tent together. Biblically. The next morning, Ben wakes to discover that he is no longer a college student. He is now back to being middle-aged, and he is now racked with guilt over his infidelity the night before. The beer cans that he and the girl emptied the night before still lay scattered about, but the girl is gone. In her place is a note card with a simple instruction. Stay on the path, or you will die. He gathers up the knapsack and any supplies that might be useful, and then discovers the dead bodies of 2 Rottweilers who are missing their face skin. He runs down the path full of fear until he comes upon a house. And there he runs into an older woman who he approaches, demanding assistance and the use of her phone. But she has no phone. Ben worries he walked all the way to Amish Town and then asks where the nearest town is. She says, "Oh, Courtshire. Courtshire is the town that's closest, and it's that way." She doesn't understand most of Ben's questions. Finally, she tells him that she can help him get to Courtshire, but the only way that she's going to be able to help him is if he weeds her garden. She promises to feed him if the weeding takes too long, and there's really no other option for Ben, so he agrees. He gets to the weeding. But when he pulls the roots, they seem unusually long. So he finds himself pulling and pulling and ripping and pulling and pulling and pulling. And finally, he gets to the end of the root, and it is 30 feet long. He looks at the garden and sees that there are about 100 of these weeds to go. Later that day, she offers him some tea, compliments the job he's been doing. She invites him into her home, and she feeds him. And once he has eaten his fill, he thanks her, and she gives him a gift. Her way of helping him get to Courtshire. It's a small little satchel, little bag, and it contains 3 hard seeds. That's it. A satchel with 3 hard seeds. Ben is fuming with anger. And then she tells him something that does not make him feel better. She tells him that the first one that he's to throw on the ground will grow into a large iron tower. The second one, a wolf, and the third, a wall of flame. Then she tells him that they will only grow exactly when they are needed. Then she told him to take whatever food he needed to go on his journey, because the journey is going to take at least until nightfall. Not only did she fill his bag, she included a cheese knife, in case he needed something sharp. The last thing she told him was her name, Mrs. Blackwell. She wouldn't answer any other of his questions and would only remind him that he must stay on the path. When Ben walks off, he's pretty damn pissed. All that work for 3 seeds. I mean, he'd been well fed and all that, and that was nice, and he did get to take some stuff with him, but still, this was not what he had in mind when she offered to help him get to town. Again on the path, he notices a light ahead. Ahead, but off the path. Ben is still trying to find rational explanations for what's happening to him. He still thinks he's in Pennsylvania. So he convinced himself that the path isn't as important. The fact that he sees a light, that's important. But what does he find as he starts to get close enough to see the light? Want to guess? Maybe 2 men wearing face skins of Rottweilers? Yep. Ben turns tail and runs as fast as he can back to the path. The men are screaming that they're going to take his face off too and show it to him before they kill him. The path continues straight, and the 2 dogmen continue to follow him until the path abruptly comes to an end at the wall of a forest. No town. Then Ben remembers his seeds. He grabs one, and he throws it up ahead, thinking, what is wrong with me? What in the world makes me think that I could throw a seed onto the ground and something will happen? But 3 steps later, he walks smack into an iron door leading into an iron tower. He enters, closes and locks the door behind him, and there's a staircase and an iron door ahead of him. He can hear the dogmen banging on the front door, and he begins to race up the stairs. About halfway up, he stops and rests. He's already exerted himself way more than he ever does anymore, and he needs to catch his breath. At the top of the stairwell, there's an observation deck that allows him to see all around. And there's no town. There's just endless forest. And the two dog men are still working on getting through the front door. They're yelling that they're going to kill him. Ben took out another seed, the second seed, and dropped it over the side of the observation deck. It fell to the ground, and Ben watched as two glowing red eyes appeared, and then a werewolf around them. The wolf destroyed both of the dog faces. The sound of it was pretty awful, and Ben found himself crying at the sound of it. The wolf then began to attack the door, just as the dog faces had. Ben raced back down the stairs and threw the final seed, but it just stayed a seed. He picked it up and turned to the iron door, the only other option, and opened it. It was dark inside, and when Ben finally took a step inside, he fell into a deep hole. And Ben passed out as he fell. He had screamed and screamed and screamed until he blacked out, and when he woke up, he was on a beach. Grains of sand in his mouth. There's a row of grassy dunes and a row of houses along the beachfront. The path that didn't lead to any of the houses, it just went past each and every one of them. Screw it, he thought, and ran to the houses, looking into the windows and trying to get someone's attention, but then he looks around and he realizes on the sand dune, a large sand dune, but that's all it was. No power lines, no vehicles, absolutely no people. He ran into one of these seemingly vacation homes and found that it was empty. Completely empty. No traces of humans whatsoever. No food, no clothes, his cell phone wouldn't reboot. He turned on the sink and nothing came out of the faucet. It's like it wasn't even real. Nothing on the sand dune was actually real. And then a large wave, taller than any building Ben had ever seen, was headed towards the dunes and very real. He ran back to the path and threw the last seed onto the ground. A wall of fire sprang up and the wave was snuffed out. And then everything returned to normal. The waves were regular. They were small and hit the shore quietly. And he knew all his chances were gone. He would have to stay on the path from here on out. He wrapped his arms around his knees and he began to cry. He sobbed that he missed his family so very, very much. He begged for help, but there was no response. He looked up at the sky and he yelled, "What do you want from me? What is this shit?" There was no response. No answer. Nothing. So he did the only thing he could do and headed down the path. There looked like there might be a deviation up ahead, so he walked towards it. There, he found signs for Courtshire and cursed that old lady because there was nothing here. About a mile after that, the path turned again. This time the path ran along a side of a 2-story house. The house was on the path, so he was safe to explore. More empty. Can you have more empty? No evidence of humans, no water, no electricity, so he picked up a vase and he threw it at the ground. Then he ripped off all the doors of all the cupboards. Everything he could find and break, he did. After exhausting every breakable item, he ate something from his pack and then fell asleep for a nap. He woke up to the sound of scratching. That's never fun, waking up to the sound of scratching. So he wasn't alone. The scratching was unnerving, and after he yelled out, he followed it up with, "I have a knife!" I mean, it was a cheese knife, but it was rather small, but hey, it was metal and it was sharp, and it was all he had. He started towards the noise and realized it was in the attic. He hadn't gone into the attic because he liked to avoid attics. I mean, who enjoys going into an attic? Unless it's finished. And then it's not really like an attic, is it? After he opened the attic door, he was sure he did not want to go in there. Because in there was a cave cricket. He knew all about cave crickets from his basement. Hard brown shells, strangely bent, long black legs. They didn't bite, but they jumped. And if you didn't get it with the vacuum on the very first go, they would inevitably jump out of the way every single time. He found them so unsettling, but he could handle them. He's the father of the family. He was sent down to the basement to get the cave cricket. Then he was going to get the cave cricket. But this one was different because this one was over 6 feet tall. And it jumped. Just like the small ones. But this time it jumped on top of him, and he began to scream, hoping his voice would be enough strength to scare the thing, but instead, it jumped again. He tried to stab the thing, but its exoskeleton was way too strong to get through with this tiny little cheese knife. Meanwhile, the thing seemed to be trying to coat him in some sort of substance, maybe to keep him still while he was consumed by it. He didn't know. He scrambled back to his pack, and he grabbed a loaf of bread, and he threw it at the creature, and the cricket seized upon the bread loaf and devoured it. Ben took this opportunity to straddle the large bug. He grabbed the cheese knife again, but this time he dove it into the creature's eye. Everything's got eyes. He sliced it open, and white ooze seeped out. The pattern of the cricket jumps became apparent to Ben, and he was able to gauge where it would be next. So he plunged the knife back into the wound he had already created, and he buried the knife into the insect all the way up to his shoulder and punching through the creature's brain. The cricket fell to the floor, and Ben ran from the house until he was on the sand of the beach, yelling, screaming, and wheezing. He found himself begging to no one again. Please, please help me. Please get me out of here. Please, someone, please. I cannot deal with this. He knew he had to go back into that attic and deal with whatever was behind the thing that was his prize for besting it, but he didn't want to. He didn't ever want to go back into that house. He certainly never wanted to see that creature again. So he lay in the sand, until, "Hey," a deep voice said. It sounded like an older man. Then again, "Hey, here, over here, shithead, down here." Ben looked around and found a small blue crab, and it was speaking to him, and it was grumpy. It kept calling him shithead. At first, Ben didn't understand how it was talking. He asks, "How are you talking? Why are you talking?" And the crab responds, "I don't know, why are you talking?" Then the crab tells him he's got to go back in the house. There's something in there he needs. Ben gets aggravated and tries to attack the crab, but instead it snaps a pincher down on one of his fingers. Then he asks the crab to come with him into the house. He knows he can't go alone another minute. There's no way. The crab makes him promise not to mess with him again. "Don't try to smash me, and I won't try to pinch you." And they agree. They head into the house after Ben asks his name, and then suggests he name him Frank. The crab says, "Call him Crab. He's very, very ornery." They get back to the attic, and the large cricket corpse is still in the same place. Ben tries not to look at it, and instead begins to search the room. There's a control panel on the back wall of the room, and now Ben is close enough to the window that he can see that in the water outside this house, there is now a large craft of some kind, anchored. On the control panel, there are 2 knobs with notches marked 1 to 100. Ben says that clearly the knobs need to be set at some specific numbers so that the lever will move. But usually with a puzzle like this, there's another piece of information, a clue to lead to the code needed, or to find where the code is, or to solve the code and figure out how to get the lever up. He searches the whole house for the clue, but there's nothing. He's utterly dejected when he returns to the attic and announces that he's looked everywhere. But the crab responds with, No, you didn't." Look in the cricket. Oh, no. He should have known. He should have known he was going to have to go back into the cricket. Now he's thinking about what he had left inside the thing when he stabbed it. He definitely felt something and thought it was a body part, but now he understood that it's what he actually needed to get out of this house. And no, the crab is not interested in going in and getting it for him. He finally reaches into the cricket's eye. First he vomits, then he keeps searching, and he reaches this disc, and he yanks, and finally he cleans it off as best he can, and on each side has a color and a number, the information he needed to complete the code. He enters the number, and he pulls the lever. The thing that looked anchored outside of the house begins to lift up out of the water, and soon a huge white hovercraft is floating above the water. It's facing into the open water and looks very powerful. Then Ben watches as the path begins to shift. It has moved to include the dock and the ship, where it is moored to the dock, and it leads out into the water now. The crab notices this too and says, "Oh, that's what it was. Although, it probably, when the crab said it, sounds more like, oh, that's what it was. He's a really deep voice. They head out of the house and go to the surf. The hovercraft is so big, it feels like a mansion on the sea. When Ben asks Crab if he's going to join Ben, Crab says, well, I mean, that craft does look kind of fancy as hell, and I'm not totally get on that thing. So they climb aboard. Crab tells him that he will need food and water, and if Ben doesn't provide, he will jump over the side and get it himself, and leave Ben all alone. Crab and Ben have some of the most entertaining conversations I have ever heard. Crab has no patience for him. None. Keeps calling him shithead and stupid human. And it's just so much fun. They happen throughout the story when they're together. For instance, at this point, Ben tries to figure out what's going on and asks Crab if he thinks he's God. But Crab doesn't know what that means. He explains about Marilyn and his family and how he's trying to get back to them, but Crab doesn't seem to get it. When exasperated, Ben says, Jesus Christ! Crab responds with, well, who's that? Ben says, never mind. And they get on the boat. I love that he's like, Jesus Christ, who's that? Oh, okay. Crab information and human information is apparently different. Okay, the hovercraft. The hovercraft is a luxury, the finest of its creation, the pinnacle of fine living. The indoor space is larger than Ben's whole house 3 times over. The boat is packed with everything you could need for a maritime travel. There is a large, full chef's kitchen, and outside of that, a full surf and turf buffet. It's as if a crew of servants had set everything up moments before they got here and then just disappeared. Ben walked over to the mountain of king crab legs and looked at Crab. His response? Don't even think about it, buddy. So Ben fills his plate with everything but the crab legs. He's still trying to use logic to explain what he's experiencing. Someone had to be here. So he explores the entire whole ship, opening every door, cupboard, access panel. How could this be? Confused but too hungry to ignore it anymore, Ben and Crab return to the buffet to eat. He loads up his plate and starts drinking the champagne directly from the bottle. It was then that he noticed a white wire plugged into a socket. A phone charger. A phone charger for his phone. He could charge his phone. But the socket is dead. There's no power on the ship. I have to turn on this boat, Ben exclaims. He races up the spiral staircase that's in the center of the ship and finds himself in the control room. He pulls at the lever to start the thing, and it sputters to life. The 2 lines of the path were clearly headed out into the water, and the path wanted him to head in that direction. Ben plugged in his phone, but the logo didn't appear. Instead, he got a picture of an older woman looking back at him, Mrs. Blackwell. She told him to find the producer. Stay on the path and find the producer. Ben asked where he is, but Mrs. Blackwell answers, at the end of the path, of course. Then she tells him that the beach will be swallowed up by the sea in about 2 minutes, and if he and the ship were still there, they'd be swallowed up with it. The phone flipped off. The phone would do nothing else, and he threw it across the room. Crab told Ben he was wasting time, so Ben grabbed the throttle, and even though Crab warned him, and he didn't listen, because he had forgotten to unmoor the craft. They were still attached to the dock. The rope was too taut to be removed. He realized his mistake right away. Crab heads towards the rope and tries to snip at it with his pincers, while Ben tries to return to the engine room, but the force of the engines is causing the ship to now lift up perpendicular to the water, right? Because the rope is pulling it, and because it's pulling it now, at this point, it's going up into the air. So now Ben can't reach any of the controls in the engine room. But all of a sudden, the craft is free of the rope. The crab had done it. And gravity now has control of the ship, and they come back down into the water with a huge crash, which throws Ben to the ground. Then the thrusters take over, and he's slammed back into the side of the ship, and eventually overboard. Oops. There was a frayed bit of rope hanging off the back of the craft, and Ben did manage to grab a hold of it, but now he's just flying out the back of it. He yells to Crab to cut the engine, and when Crab gets to the engine, he realizes the only thing he can do is cut a wire, so that's what he does, and the engine stops. Ben climbs back aboard, bloody, exhausted, and just trying to breathe. He tells Crab to leave him alone, but Crab says he can't. The boat is drifting, and soon we're not going to be on the path anymore. Well, that gets Ben moving. They have indeed drifted so far that one of the path edges is now directly under the craft. Ben races to the engine room and finds the cut wire. He manages to get the two ends of the wires wrapped back together, gifting himself with one more shock and therefore injury to his already broken body. But the engine starts. He straightens out the boat and exhales. He finds his cell on the floor from where he threw it and tries to power it on. Nothing. So he speaks. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know who I'm talking to. I don't know. Am I talking to God, to this producer, or something else? But I need to see my family. I just need to see them one more time. Please. That is what I need. It is the only thing that will allow me to keep going. And his cell phone flashes on. It provides him with one picture. It's of the 5 of them all together at a Chuck E. Cheese's. The 9-year-old is making a face. The 6-year-old is distracted by the chocolate cake, and the little one is being held on Ben's lap, clearly squirming. Teresa, his wife, has her arm around everyone, and her thumb is rubbing along her wedding ring in that nervous habit she always seems to have. He smiles and thanks whoever it was that provided the picture. Then he goes to take a shower, and when he gets back, Crab jumps into the water to feed himself. He comes back almost instantly and reminds Ben that he doesn't need 2 pounds of food. He's a little tiny crab. Then Ben goes down below and tries to sleep, but he can't. When he comes back to the open-air deck, Crab asks him about the scar on his face. When Ben was a boy, a dog had attacked him and bitten his face. It was a Rottweiler. Anyone surprised by this information? Yeah, I'm not either. Not at all surprised that it was a Rottweiler. Finally, Ben is able to fall into a deep sleep from which he wakes up in his own bed. He's alone, but it's his bed, in his house. He climbs out of bed and heads downstairs where he finds his wife, curled up into a ball on the couch, crying. She's still in her scrubs from her shift as a nurse, and when he asks her what's wrong, she can't talk about it. He thinks of how lovely it is that she refuses to bring home the trauma from her work and to bring it into their homes and into their lives. There are things neither of them will talk about at home. When something has just too much trauma to discuss, they leave it outside the house. They leave it outside their relationship, and it has worked for them. It's worked really well for them. So Ben holds on to his wife as she sobs and tells her, and he tells her that it will be okay, that he's here for her. And he thought about how wonderful it was that they could be completely comfortable in silence together. Still, he told her that this one time she could tell him it's okay, but she refused. All she would tell him was that she had killed someone, and that it would kill her to talk to him about it. So he apologized and held her again, and again she said she couldn't talk about it. Wait a minute. Ben remembers this night. This is not happening. This is a memory. Teresa canceled her next 3 shifts and stayed silent for days after that. It took over a week for her to begin acting like herself again, which was when Ben woke up on the hovercraft, which had crashed into an iceberg. Ben was woken up midair because they crashed into an iceberg, but when he fell asleep, it was 80 degrees outside. What? There was no landmass within sight. Just a gigantic, blue-tinted iceberg that made Crab look like an ant next to its enormity. Then he runs to a closet on the ship, opens it, and finds the highest quality outdoor gear inside, all new and all his size. He grabs it all, along with a pen and notebook from the room, about a dozen extra water bottles, and he heads out. The craft was listing pretty heavily now. Crab's yelling to Ben to hurry up. He clicked the release to allow the safety boat to fall into the water away from the sinking craft. It was large enough for at least 24 men to be rescued. Ben grabbed the keys and got the safety boat moving. He and Crab watched as the hovercraft sank underneath the water. They looked around for the path, but there was only ice. There was a radio on the dashboard, and Ben tried every channel until he heard a voice. The compass just kept spinning and spinning in every direction. He screamed for help, and the voice said to go around the ice and that the path would reappear. That iceberg must have been 2 miles across. It took them such a long time to travel around it, but they did finally make it around to the other side. The voice came back and told him that he was
doing a great job because he was not dead.
Finally, the sun came into view, and the ice began to liquefy around them. The path then reappeared, and he drove forward. He ate a loaf of bread, then he grabbed the pen and paper and began to write to Teresa. He was not a gifted writer. He was a gifted talker. It's what made him such a good salesman. He began to think he should have written her more, and more often, so that if he never got back to her, she would still have his words of love. He drank a full bottle of water, rolled up the note to his wife, put it inside, closed the top tight, and threw it into the water. The voice announced herself again, saying that
they were getting closer.
She seemed excited by their imminent arrival, and Ben questioned why she excitedly explained that she was looking forward to killing him. Oh, dear. They landed on an island that was snow-covered, and Ben did his very first snowshoeing in crampons. It was intimidating footwear, but Ben continued forward. Before leaving the lifeboat, he took the first aid kit, the flare gun, and the flares with him. The unlikely pair headed towards the path, with the crab a few feet ahead of Ben, when Ben started to smell something terrible, and the crab came rushing back to him and said, "Don't look! Don't look!" When Ben asked why, he already knew from the smell. He asked if there were dead crabs up ahead, and Crab responded with, No, not dead crabs. Good for me. Bad for you." The smell got worse. Ben closed his eyes. He stepped into a thick and soft object that squished under the spikes of his crampon. Crab promised that he was still on the path, and that no, he did not want to know what he was walking on. He told himself it was sticks and mud, leaves, and the like. Finally, he felt ice again beneath his feet and saw there was a large cliff ahead of him. One he would have to climb. Ben had all the tools he needed to climb, and he tried to use his legs to let his arms rest, but his arms were dead so quickly. He was about halfway up when he looked back, that saw the path of dead bodies. Why did he do that? He kept his eyes closed the entire time, only to look back. His dead arms began to ache. The cut on his hand opened, and blood dripped down his arm. He began to feel like he was dying. He had one more ledge to get over. He waited a moment, gave himself a little bit of a rest, and pulled himself up over the ledge when he finally lay back and began to laugh. Ben ate before they continued on. Then a voice came through the dark.
"You're here! Hurry up!"
the voice said. Sounded like maybe it was the same voice from the radio. Ben told Crab to hide himself and not to go into the cave any further, just in case. Crab protested, but Ben explained that he was trying to keep Crab safe and alive. Ben headed deeper into the cave, and a bat with a wingspan of about 6 feet swooped down over him. He crashed to the ground, crying. The woman's voice came through the darkness again.
"What's keeping you? You're really close now. You're doing such a good job. Let's keep going."
A pinprick of light began to grow until it began to fill the giant opening. Lined with crystals of all kinds, there was a small reflecting pool and a carpet the size of a football field covering a heaping mound of human possessions. Backpacks, clothes, watches, boats, suitcases, radios, shoes, and more. Next to it was a black cauldron bubbling over a fire, and on top of the heap was a woman. A woman about 35 feet tall. She sat munching on peanuts. Her hand held at least 100. No, at least 1,000. She introduced herself as Fermona. She demanded he stand in the light and give her a chance to look at him. She asked about his scar. He told her he slayed a giant. She noticed him noticing the cauldron and offered him some stew. When he asked what was in it, and she answered,
"People, of course."
Ben vomited, and the large woman ushered him off of her rug. Then she demanded he take his clothes off. She made him take off his bag and his underwear. She told him to put all of his things onto the pile. Then she gestured that he put his underwear back on. Then she announced that he needed to bulk up. She offered him stew again, but he turned it down. He threw a poncho at him and told him to wear it. He followed Fermona down a corridor where she took out a ring of keys and opened a lock on a door. He walked through the doorway and Fermina pushed him in. He fell 20 feet into the hole, and she told him again that he needed to bulk up. She showed him where the food and water would come from. She told him that he would be fighting, but she didn't tell him who, or what, for that matter. The depression of his youth came back very easily. It sank into him like an old friend. It was easy to slip into depression's comforting silence. Fermona visited 3 times a day, tossing turkey legs and water into the hole for him to consume, and one day she noticed his depression and told him to tell her about his family. When he got to his oldest daughter, Flora, he told Fermona that she loved foxes, and the giant woman gasped, ran off, saying that she had something for him. Fermona returned with a round, plushy fox. It had ear flaps and 4 stubby little legs, and Flora had one just like it among her 40-something plushies that adorned her bed. Ben hugged the soft toy and began to cry. Then he thanked Fermona. Then all of a sudden he was in a hospital. He was under a light sheet and blanket. The cut on his hand was gone, but why would there be a cut on his hand? Ben thinks to himself that he's 35 years old and he's never cut himself there. He looks around the room. He's in. A doctor. There's a doctor in a lab coat, a table with medical instruments laid out, and the far wall is covered in silver rectangular doors. Wait a minute. He's in a morgue. When he got off the table, he saw that he's in a suit. And the man in the room with him asked him to look at some things. He took Ben over to a table where there were many items, now blackened by fire, smoke, and ash, and asked if they were Ben's father's. Yes, Ben confirms. He tells the doctor that no, he doesn't want to see the body, but the doctor pushes. Please, just help me out. But the face is so blackened. But he can still tell us his father. Then the coroner tells Ben that it's okay if he feels relieved that his father is dead. The coroner reminds Ben that he had hoped for his father's death, and when he heard about it, the news had felt like nothing. Ben began to cry. And then he woke up in Fermona's hole. About 3 feet away from him was a small, blackened lump. His father's class ring. He picked it up, cleaned it off as best he could, and slipped it onto his finger. And then he heard the doorway open, followed by a psst. It was Crab. He had to look around for a while and says that Ben looks a lot better than the other men that are locked up, but Ben tells Crab that he needs his bag from Fermona's pile of stuff in the main shaper. Crab tells Ben that she sleeps on that pile and there's no way he's going back for the bag. Ben protests and then Crab scurries off and returns with the bag. Crab and Ben bicker some more. Ben tells Crab that his pants and boots are still on the pile. Crab protests having to go back to Fermona's pile. Ben tries to climb out with the ice pick on his just bare feet. And when he falls back down, Crab goes and gets him the boots. But Crab says, I will get you your things, but you have to make me a promise. And the promise you have to make is that you won't give up. At any point on this journey, you need to always keep going, no matter how long it takes. And when Ben asks why, Crab says he can't say. But instead, Crab scampers away and comes back with the boot, and then with the other boot, and then with the pants, and finally with his sweater. Ben promises to never give up. He climbs up the side of the hole nearly effortlessly. The week in the hole had been enough time to heal his muscles and allow for some growth. He was probably in the best shape he'd been in years. When Ben and Crab got to the main room, they were met by a very awake Fermona, who is tickled that Ben is now strong enough to fight. She demands his clothes again, including his underwear this time, then announced that they would be going into the fire because he had lost pile status. Then she put him back in his hole. Finally, she looked in at him and asked,
1 man or 5 dwarfs?
Ben's like, what? What kind of a question is that?
Which would you like to fight?
Then she lets him sleep on it and to tell her in the morning. Crab comes back and told him that his stuff was being burned. Then he and Crab discuss his options. 5 dwarfs, 1 man. Crab's asks if he knew how to fight, and he told him a bit. His wife had taught him. Your wife taught you? Crab says. He remembered back when a strange man had punched him in the parking garage. It was one of those just random acts of violence that just came literally out of nowhere. By the time Ben had regained his composure, the man was gone. Teresa had then insisted on taking him to the jiu-jitsu place where she had trained to learn at least a few moves, blocks, and takedowns, just enough to protect himself. He might have a chance if he could get to a weapon. He asked Crab to go looking through Pheromona's pile for something, anything that might help. When Ben pictured the man he would have to fight, he looked just like the man in the parking garage, because he had decided on fighting one man. Teresa had gotten into jiu-jitsu not long after that night she came home from work, devastated and refusing to talk about it. She trained him hard, and he was weak for weeks. Ben fell asleep on the floor of Pheromona's hole, thinking about Teresa. When he woke up, the giant woman fed him better than every other morning there. She took him out of his hole and placed him in front of a cage where the fight would take place. Inside the cage was a man about his size, wearing a Rottweiler's face over his own. He tries to run away, but of course there's nowhere to go. Ben thought back to his football days. When the dog face came at him, he dodged. Then he dodged again. Pheromona started to whine.
Come on! You're just getting out of the way. This is not a fight.
Ben then managed to get the dog face off of his feet and then grabbed his throat as they both stood back up. Pheromona cheered. Ben hated fighting. It was stupid, and it was so very tiring. The dog face pulled his fingers back, wrenching his arm around. Ben turned into it at his waist. As the dog face came down towards him, one of Teresa's lessons flashed in his mind. He bent his knees and sent the dog face off to the side. He followed that up with a punch to the dog face's eye with his father's class ring. Then he punched the other eye, still with the class ring. The dog face was losing the struggle. Ben did not stop until Pheromona announced it was over. She picked up the loser, bit off his head, and then grunted.
Oof, too hairy.
Pheromona complimented Ben and then told him that she lied, that he was now going to have to fight the 5 dwarfs. But about a minute after their coordinated attack began, Crab appeared at Ben's side and dropped the leather pouch and 3 seeds at his side. He slammed one down onto the ground and prayed for the werewolf. Instead, he found himself holding a gun. A gun. He shot into the air, and the dwarves were suddenly listening to him. The cage door was open, and he ushered them out, then pointed the gun at Pheromona. She told him that little gun wasn't going to be able to hurt her, but he protested. He said he knew little bullets could cause a lot of damage. Then he insisted that she let everyone go. All the men in the cages, and the dwarfs too. She protested, saying,
The dwarves stay here because they want to. I don't even provide for them. They have their own little party room, and I never go over there.
So Ben said, okay, fine. Everybody else has to go. And when she gave him a hard time, he cocked the hammer. She crossed her arms, asked him if she could keep just a couple, but Ben wouldn't hear of it. So she went and unlocked all the doors, and the naked people wandered out of Pheromona's mountain. She complained that he had just let all of her food go. Then he asked for his things back, but they were burned. So he demanded to be re-outfitted. He got clothes, boots, weapons, food, mostly non-perishable. He repacked his bags, and then Pheromona reached into the pile and brought his pack out with his stuffed fox for Flora. He thanked her, honestly. Then he asked if she was going to let them go or chase after them. She agreed to let them go. She didn't have any answers to his questions either. She didn't know who the producer was or how she had gotten to the mountain in the first place. She didn't know where the people on the path had come from, and she didn't know what was on the other side of the mountain. And what's more, she did not care. And here, the path is going to tease Ben in a very, very cruel way. Next to, but not on the path, is a house. A house that Ben knows very well. It's his house. And he watches as the door opens and his son, his youngest, Peter, comes out of the house. He picks up the hose and he starts watering the lawn. Ben remembers how he always has loved to do that. and when he looked up, he waved. "Hi, Dad!" Ben gasped, stood in the doorway, and told his father that he couldn't walk over to his father because he had to go inside and get cleaned up. Ben tried to convince Peter to come over, but he wouldn't. And Crab warned him, "Remember, none of this is real." Ben screamed, "This is too cruel." He stomped down the path and towards the producer, angrier than he had ever been. The house was so far behind them that he couldn't see it anymore. Crab gently told Ben that there was something up ahead. The split. A fork in the road. And Ben and Crab were going to have to take different paths. "Why?" said Ben. "'Cause the last time Crab was here, he took the other fork. And now it's his turn to take this fork." And it began to dawn on him. Crab used to be human. Ben asked his name, and Crab told him he does not want to know what his name is. Ben held the gun towards Crab and asked again. Finally, Crab looked down and said quietly, "My name is Ben." Which means Ben has so much farther to go. He has to head down this path and eventually turn into a talking blue crab and come back this way to go back down that way. At first, all Ben wants to know is how long it's been. And he finally gets the answer. 10 years, more or less. Ben crumples to the ground. Crab reminds Ben that he made that promise to keep going. "No," Ben says, "no." He's going to stay with Crab, and he's going to make the voyage shorter. But of course, that's not an option. He can't go down that way. It's blocked for him. Crab has already done everything down the path, and Ben still has to walk it. So eventually, the two do head off in different directions. Before parting, Crab tells Ben that he should throw a seed when he sees Pheromona again, and tells Ben what it turns into is a surprise, but it will help to handle the giant. Crab tells him that he can adjust to anything as long as he continues on. He tells him that there is a tent ahead of him and that there's a castle ahead of that. But to get to the castle, he's going to have to first return to Pheromona. He should sleep in the tent first. Then the little blue crab walked down the path to the left that Ben would have to wait a decade to head down himself. Ben thought about what it might be like to be a crab. He imagined sitting down and just staying there until he decomposed. He could see a bit of Pheromona's mountain in the distance, but it would take him a while to walk back, and he decided to take Crab's advice, to spend the night here, in the little red tent. He looked around and saw that the path wound up another mountain, and one held a large black castle atop of it. He watched as a large winged creature unfurled its wings, took flight, and vanished behind the castle. Ben then decided to start setting up the little tent. But when he entered it, through the small little flap, it opened into a large library. Leather-bound volumes lined the walls, a desk with a gold pen, and a king-size sleigh bed covered in a thick, downy comforter. He walked over to the bed, took off his shoes and socks, and climbed into the large bed. It was so soft and comforting that he was asleep moments after closing his eyes. He woke to the sound of a young boy nudging him awake. "Ben! Ben, are you awake? Ben! Ben, are you awake?" Ben knew that voice. That was Tony Watts. He hadn't heard that voice in 25 years. No. Wait, no, 20 years. No. Was it 5? No, wait. Today is Saturday. And Ben had been looking over to the sleepover all week. It was 1990. He was in the red sleeping bag in Tony's basement. The two boys climbed out of their bags after Tony announced his mom was asleep. Tony led Ben upstairs to his father's liquor cabinet and pointed to the peach schnapps. Then Tony showed him the bag of bottle rockets he had. The two boys put on their sweatpants and shoes and headed out of the house. Tony lived in a small, underwhelming subdivision suburb. There were blocks after blocks of small family houses. The two boys pulled out flowers from one of the front yards and tossed them into a mailbox of another or the hood of a car. The boys giggled and wowed at their own brazenness. At the park, they opened the bottle of schnapps and each took a swig. It wasn't as bad as the liquor he'd smelled in the past. It did actually taste like peaches. The boys were giggling now, both feeling the effects. They found an empty Coke can and filled it with bottle rockets. They lit a match, and the wick burnt until the rockets exploded. They were shocked at how loud the firecrackers were. They laughed and high-fived, and they found an empty mailbox and put the black cats into that. It sounded so loud, the boys were laughing uncontrollably. At least they did until they heard sirens in the background. They ran. They ran and they hid. Finally, they heard the sirens getting quieter and quieter and exhaled. Authorities were finally leaving. They went back to Tony's house, filled the liquor bottles so that they didn't look like they had taken any, and headed back into the basement to play Nintendo. But then Ben reminded himself, that's not how the night ended. It didn't really end that way, did it? Of course it didn't. What actually happened was that they had run through a backyard with a chained-up Rottweiler, and Tony had yelled at the dog, and the chain around the dog's neck gave him much more space than the boys had assumed. So the dog had jumped up and bitten Ben's face off. It knocked him over and mauled him. It tore at his eye socket, and Ben wailed, praying the dog would leave him be. And what did Tony do? Tony ran away. He left you alone in the backyard. It was the police that showed up and shot the dog. The tugging on his face had stopped with the sound of a loud pop, and the dog's dead body fell atop him. Next thing he knew, he was in an ambulance, blind in one eye. Later, the doctor would tell Ben that if he got into the hospital 10 minutes later, he would have lost that eye. It took 97 stitches to get Ben back together. Tony had been found by the police as well. His mother pulled him out of school the following Monday, and Ben never, ever saw his friend again. When he woke up to find himself in the library bedroom, he discovered a bottle of half-empty peach schnapps. He saw that one of the large volumes on the top shelf was sitting out from the rest of the books, as if it was a secret lever to open a secret passage. He climbed up the library ladder and grabbed the book. Dr. Abigail Blackwell's Accounting of the Curiously Undead. Mrs. Blackwell, the only person he'd met so far, there was one page that had been dog-eared, and the book opened easily to that page. It was an index of sorts. Now, I'm going to read you these things because it's the only way that, I need to tell you exactly how the author explained these things. So, this is just sort of an explanation of a few creatures that Ben may encounter, okay? So there's regenerators. These are normal-looking humans who have the ability to grow back anything that's been chopped off, including their heads. And they're cannibalistic. Smokes. Small black clouds that have bright white eyes. They can roll over a man and asphyxiate him to death with their poisonous ash. Mute, but highly intelligent. The skinless. These are zombies who appear as skinless human beings. Deaf, blind, turn the living skinless merely by touching them. Jellies. Gelatinous organisms that aim to absorb and smother. Head spiders. Spiders that possess human heads in the middle of their little bodies. They possess a poisonous bite that causes paralysis. Once paralyzed, they slowly devour the body until only the head is left, which then sprouts the spider legs. Brainless. Mouth demons. Vile creatures with multiple mouths all over their bodies. One bite from a mouth demon causes a mouth to grow where the wound once was. Brainless. Lord Vorus. Eyes are pitch black, save for the pupils, which Vorus can use to shine a light bright enough to burn through virtually any living being. Winged, bloodless, but possesses skin so hot to the touch that it can cause victims to burst into flames. Will kill or possess any human who gets in his way. The only way to kill Vorus, the book said, was to kill him in his sleep by feeding him a glowing solution, a poison. Ben looked at the ingredients. Curry powder, the dead tissue of another undead being, the dead stewed tissue of a human. The next ingredient on the list, though, was completely unintelligible. But the final element of the poison was not. A drop or two of peach schnapps. Ben dropped the book onto the floor. Oh, God. And then it became clear. He knew where to get the curry and the stewed human tissue. Pheromona. That's why he had to return to her. So return to her he did. She was surprised.
You again?
He told her he needed a trade, that he wanted some of her stew. He removed a pickle jar from his bag, emptied the contents into the bonfire, and asked Pheromona to fill it with stew. She demanded a trade. He told her that he thought that she had never had anything else to eat besides humans. She didn't even seem to like them that much, so maybe he could offer her something to eat that she'll really enjoy. So he offered her a package of hot dogs from the campsite. She was dubious, but Ben convinced her to taste them, and so she did. She had one, and then the rest of the package was gone. She demanded more. Ben grabbed the seed in his pocket and slammed it onto the ground. It became a dart gun that had a note on it. Shoot yourself. So he did. All of a sudden, he felt full, like he'd eaten a hippo. Then his fingers began to elongate and his head began to seem to grow, and he grew and he grew and he grew until he was nearly the size of Pheromona, though he was still shorter than her. She began to protest. He said he had more hot dogs for her, but he needed to look through her pile of things so that he could find what he needed to use. She made him promise not to come back again, and then allowed him to look through her stuff. He tossed another package of hot dogs over to Pheromona, but this one was huge. It was Pheromona-sized. She clapped her hands like a schoolgirl with too much joy to keep inside. He took some more of the supplies. He took saltpeter, sand, more food, and some torches from the walls. He asked Pheromona if she had ever heard of a creature called Vorus. No, she did not know of him, but she had heard that name from some of the people she had taken and eaten over the years. They were extremely fearful of whoever, whatever Vorus was. Pheromona bid him goodbye.
See you never.
And Ben headed towards Vorus. He made it back to the Black Castle very quickly. His new size made the distance very small. The Black Castle was surrounded by a moat filled with a liquid that resembled blood. The castle drawbridge was shut tight, so Ben reached over and pulled the bridge down. But the chains snapped, and the drawbridge disintegrated into nothing. He grabbed a can of tomatoes, drank it like a juice box, and then took a running leap over the expanse and landed in front of the double glass doors that were the entrance to the castle. As soon as he landed, he felt a strange sensation and found the effects of the gun were wearing off. He found himself man-sized again and walked through the doors that clicked locked behind him. He was in the lobby of a hotel, an empty lobby of a hotel. There was a clerk behind the front desk, but he was so unmoving that Ben thought he might be waxworks, but he was real. When Ben walked up to the counter, the man handed over a plastic key. The dining room looked like it was closed for the night, chairs on top of all the tables, but one spot still sat ready for a customer. He took the seat and ordered a drink. It arrived, and he was shocked that it was real. He finished it and got another. He walked outside onto the patio and over to the fire pit. He thought about Teresa and how she would find a way to cope with his being gone. Eventually, he fell asleep until the clerk tapped him on the shoulder, indicating it was time for him to retire to his room. He had been assigned room 906, so he took the elevator to the 9th floor. When he reached his room, the key sensor kept turning red instead of green, and the door would not open. When Ben returned to the elevator, he found a mouth demon in the middle of the hallway. It took a bite out of his arm, and a mouth began to grow there. Ben scrambled for his bag, reached in to get the gun, but when he took it out, it was actually the paint gun that he'd taken from Pheromona. But paint can fill mouths, shooting at the mouth demon's mouths. It didn't like that. He filled all the mouths, then turned the creature over and filled all of the mouths on its back and legs. Finally, it stopped moving and the mouths began to disappear. Finally, what was left was a man's corpse. The mouth on Ben's arm was also gone now. When he got back to his hotel room door, this time the key worked. The suite was bigger and nicer than any hotel room he had ever been in. Then he remembered the ingredients list, and he returned to the man. He cut off a chunk of the man's flesh and dropped it into the pickle jar. He returned to his room and bolted the door shut. He picked up a pen and paper and tried to draw the picture of his family that had appeared on his cell phone for a few moments back when he had started his journey. But he was hopeless. He had no talent for drawing, and it just looked terrible. But just then, a bird flew into his room and deposited a sheet of paper into his hands. It was an art project that Rudy created. Using his handprints, the poem talked about how small he was. He wasn't going to say stay so small, so here was a record of him being small. Ben cursed the birds and then thanked them. He put the picture next to Flora's fox, kissed them both, and went to sleep. This time when he woke up, he was in 10th grade, and he was in the principal's office, and so was his mother. The principal, Mrs. Blackwell. Wait a minute. Mrs. Blackwell? That was his principal's name. She was asking him about his journal, the writing assignment they were told would stay private. She was asking him why he wrote such things. Ben doesn't have an answer beyond being mad about stuff sometimes. She asked him if he planned on hurting someone, and he was shocked by the question. Of course not. He was just doing what the teacher said, writing anything. Write what comes out of you. And now he's in trouble? He woke up with Voris floating above him. The pupils of the creature's eyes were like a separate entity. Ben could feel himself being taken over. He knew he had no power against this creature, and he asked what Voris wanted from him. Voris lifted Ben up into the air and flew them both out of the hotel and into the sky. Voris flew with Ben for over an hour and finally brought him down to the ground by a cordoned-off section of land, about an acre in size. There were large piles of white stones sitting next to the section. There were also 2 smokes. They dropped pickaxes and shovels at Ben's feet. He looked up at Voris and the smokes and yelled that they could all go to hell. Voris looked at Ben, and all of a sudden his thoughts were in Ben's head.
What makes you think this isn't hell?
When he asked Voris what it was he wanted of him, he was given a very simple answer. Build me a castle. Ben said, it can't be done. It'll take too long. But Voris simply shrugged and flew away. Beyond the smokes, the path led off into the distance. Sitting at the top of the path was a red pickup truck. He asked Voris if he finished the castle, if he could have the truck, but the demon just flew away. The smokes, however, remained. Ben unpacked his case. He set up the tent and found that it was the same library tent he had when Voris had picked him up and flown him out here. The smokes entered the tent and tried to hand him tools. He told them to wait, but they approached him and began to choke him. Ben yelled, "Okay, okay," and got to digging. It was slow work, and when a gust of wind came, it would blow some of the dirt back into the hole. It was agonizing how little he accomplished each day. Still, he tried to keep his mind focused on the plan. The poison wasn't complete, but he had to hide it somewhere, and his seeds needed to be kept safe as well, so he hid them all. As he dug at the ground, a hand reached up and tried to grab at his ankle. Eventually, a skinless creature came up from the ground, and Ben ran back to the tent, grabbed a handful of salt, and threw it at the creature. The smokes came and carried the carcass off once it was no longer a threat to Ben. This was not the last skinless Ben would have to deal with. Time became monotonous. Every morning at dawn, the smokes would enter his tent, give him his tools, usher him outside. He would get a short break for lunch, then get right back to work. Voris flew overhead every 3 days. He was able to keep his tent, so he slept each night in that big fluffy bed, which was really nice, and he also got to sleep next to the handprint and the fluffy fox that he tucked away each night. One day he found a smooth rock that if he stared at it long enough, he could see eyes. He named it Peter, and now he had 3 things to tuck in each night. Ben worked day after day. He kept a tally until he ran out of space on paper and started marking the wooden floor. There were hundreds of tally marks, but he kept going. He knew there was more. There was more after this. He still had to become a crab and meet up with his younger self. That was important. In many ways, it helped to keep him going, day after day. The harder he worked, the more food the smokes would bring him. He was getting strong and bigger. His shoulders were broad, and he didn't even mind the physical transformation. He noticed that he was becoming calloused everywhere, not just his body, but his attitude. He also consumed almost every book in the library in his tent. He searched for the answers to the final ingredient to the poison. He pored over the books. He read a few over and over, searching for answers. Then he started working on his drawing. He tried to remember everything. Teresa had taught him about light and shadows, about perspective and depth, and because of how much time he had, he actually began to improve. One day, he hit bedrock and knew that his foundation was almost complete. He worked like that, alone, day in and day out for 6 years. One day, while mixing the concrete with water, a stiff wind came by and knocked a metric ton of sand onto his foundation. It would have to be excavated again. Ben was so mad, he threw the tools at the smokes and screamed at them. He screamed that they never helped him. They just stood around watching. He threatened to destroy them both someday, which was when they seemed to get an idea. They flew over to his tent, to his home. In an instant, his tent, with all of his books, his drawings, his plush fox, and his handprint picture, all of it went up in fire and smoke. It was then that Voris flew overhead holding a man in his giant talons. The man was dropped next to Ben. He was barely 5 feet tall. He wore boots, leather pants, a puffy shirt, and had a scabbard tucked into his belt. Ben helped him to his feet, and then the man drew his sword and held it towards Ben. He demanded to know who Ben was. It took some conversation, but they finally figured out that no, Ben was not the producer. He was just another guy on the path. And that Cisco, that was the man's name, was a sailor on the high seas. He had a Spanish accent and believed it was 1495. Ben told Cisco that they had to get working. He explained about the smokers and how they worked for Voris. Cisco agreed, and the two men got to work. Together, they built the castle. It was slow work, but they advanced. They got to know each other very well. Cisco was a devout Catholic who believed in Spain and God and Jesus and the Queen. No matter what Ben told him about his future, he would not believe it. The two men became very close friends. They made up a secret code so that they could discuss the poison Ben had been working on. He still didn't know what the last ingredient was, but he continued to experiment. The food and water the smokes provided started to drop off. One day, they got no water at all. The two men made a cannibalism pact. You can't eat me until I'm dead, okay? They lived like that for 4 years. One evening, Cisco gently told Ben that the poison was a fruitless pursuit. He had tried everything, but Ben protested. He could tell there was something. He just couldn't see it. He began to draw a picture of his wife in the sand. He focused on her ring, her wedding ring. Cisco reminded him that he had already tried the rings. But then Ben could see the answer. His ring and his father's ring. One was brass and one was tin, but his wife's wedding ring, that ring was gold. What they needed was gold. And they had some. Cisco got up and backed away from his friend. You cannot have my tooth. The men discussed it. They argued. They debated. And finally, Cisco agreed. But only if he could do the same to Ben that Ben wanted to do to him. Ben would also have to have a tooth pulled. It was only fair. And Ben agreed. After both teeth had been extracted, Ben put Cisco's into the pickle jar, and the potion began to glow. It worked. Later that night, Ben took the seed and threw it onto the ground. In its place now stood a vacuum. Ben was shocked. Threw it into the hole and covered it up. Cisco asked what it was, but Ben said he would understand it better when he saw it in action. That night, the two men behaved as if they were getting drunk, but they weren't. When the smokers came over to them, Ben was ready with the vacuum. He sucked up the first one and ran after the second one, who had Cisco. But the second one started to choke Ben. Cisco recovered, grabbed the vacuum, and hit the wrong button and released the one that had been trapped. Oh! Ben began to think that it was over. He had tried his best. He had failed, and then the smoker let him go. Both were in the vacuum. Cisco had saved him. They grabbed their belongings, including the completed potion, hopped into the truck, and sped down the path. This is an amazing scene. Cisco had never been in a car before. He'd never even considered such a thing, right? And Ben can push this thing to 120 miles per hour because they're the only ones out there, and it's the only vehicle anywhere on the beach. Cisco asks how it could go so fast, and Ben's answer is gas, baby, it's gas. And Cisco's like, I shall bring this back to the Queen of Spain. they're just laughing. They're just having a great time. It's just, all of a sudden, there's some freedom to them that they didn't have before. But up ahead, Ben sees it. When Cisco asks what it is, Ben says, life. It's a convenience store with gas pumps outside. They were running low on gas. This scene is somehow even better. Okay, the store isn't technically open, but Ben throws a huge bag of saltpeter through one of the windows to gain entrance. It's super fun. Cisco knows nothing of convenience stores or the things they contain. When he has his first tortilla chip, he is delighted, and then follows it up with, 40 more. He takes all the plastic beaded jewelry he finds because, natives will trade for them. They pack up everything in their magic bags that can hold everything without adding weight, and as Ben thinks of it, saddled with enough sugar to kill a diabetic, they're off again. Finally, they make it to Vorris's mountain, but the mirror double doors were locked, and the electric keypad gave Ben no clues as to the password. No, wait, there's a sequence of numbers here. 0, 1, 8, 11, 88. Ben assumes the next number is what they need to open the doors. He presses 111, then 888. Nothing. He looks at the sequence again. What if they aren't numbers? He considers what they are, that they might actually be shapes. Now, if that's true, then the next number would be 101. The double doors click open. As they pass through the doors, they click closed. They would not open again. They move forward into the cavern. They came across the bellhop from the hotel, but when Cisco cut his head off, another one just sprouted in its place. Then Cisco was seized upon by a giant man-spider hybrid, the spiders with the man heads. He shouted for Ben to handle the bellhop. There was a bit of a struggle with the packaging, but Ben eventually got the canister open and sprayed the bellhop, whose mouth was now open far beyond what it should. Once the thing was doused, Ben leapt up and grabbed a torch off the wall and lit the thing up, just as Cisco was cutting off all 8 of the spider thing's legs. They had triumphed. And they were exhausted. So exhausted that they still had to make their way to Voris and kill him. After winding their way through the castle, they made it to a large open space with a wall of fire blocking their path. In front of the fire was a statue of Voris. In front of that was a padded prayer rail, and the instructions read, pray. Cisco does not allow Ben to pray. He says, you cannot pray to this thing. Ben says, well, you don't have to mean it. But Cisco will not relent. Finally, throwing object after object at the wall and nothing changing, Cisco says, fine, we will pray. You will pray with me, but not to that monster. They stood holding hands facing away from the statue. Cisco instructed Ben to repeat after him. They start with what sounds like the 23rd Psalm, but quickly move towards a main line that is, when thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burnt. Neither shall the flame kindle upon thee. Cisco instructs Ben to say it out loud to make sure the message makes it all the way to God himself. Then Cisco dropped Ben's hand, turned towards the wall of fire, and said, God is with us. And he walked into the wall of fire. Ben was shocked. He yelled his friend's name, but nothing. He thought about what had just happened. Cisco told him that not meaning the prayer isn't really prayer, so he turned around again, this time kneeling. He said the words again, but this time he believed them. When he walked through the fire, he found Cisco smiling and saying, I didn't we didn't have to pray to that thing. They were inside now, and there was a sarcophagus where Voris slept. They made a plan. Open the lid, pry open his mouth, don gloves first, of course, because his skin will burn them, and then pour the poison down its throat. Which they did, successfully. At least they got some of it into his mouth. But then Voris awoke. Ben slammed his hand over the monster's mouth, trying to get enough of the poison down its throat, while Cisco tried to wrangle his wings to stop him from flying. Both men squeezed their eyes shut and had to do all of this blind. Soon Voris was on his feet. The poison spit out of his mouth and onto the ground. Voris went after Ben. He dug his talons into Ben's flesh, and he yelled out to Cisco to throw the seed. And when he did, the seed began to grow and grow and grow until it became a woman 35 feet tall. Philmona! She towered over all three combatants as if she'd come across bunnies in a yard. Voris's eyes didn't make any impact on the giant woman, and even he stood in shock. She reached down, plucked Voris from the ground, and swallowed him in one gulp. Ben then yelled that she should have a chaser, and handed her the pickle jar. She downed it, saying,
Yuck.
Then asked for more food.
Those dog things. I want more of those dog things, if you please.
Ben tells her about the convenience store that had tons of hot dogs and where it is. Then, before she leaves, Ben says, you're not going to eat us, are you? And she says, no, I'm not, because, they're on the path. And that's when it hits Ben. Wait a minute. If I get off the path, I'll die. The flip side of that is that if I stay on the path, I cannot die. Pheromona then destroys Voris's mountain and takes the two men and places them back on the path next to the truck. And they drive for hours. They eat junk food. Cisco marvels at the AC until finally they reach a spot on the path that opens up into three paths. One heading to the beach, one heading away, and one heading to a villa, with a beautifully appointed table set up in front of it with a placard sat in front with a small vial that said the name Ben. Cisco asks what all this means. Ben says it's time for them to part. He has to go into the sea, and Cisco has to go on his own way. He knew he had reached the point in his journey where he would become a small, blue, talking crab. But first, the villa. It was an open-air space with 3 bedrooms and a buffet table covered in the most delicious food Ben could even ever imagine. And beer. There was so much beer. He grabbed 2, peeled off his clothes down to his boxers, and headed into the water. Cisco joined him. Then he announced that he would be leaving in the morning. Ben was surprised so soon, but Cisco wanted to get back to his explorations. He wanted to get back to exploring for his queen. He tells Ben he's glad their friendship will end like this, at its peak, that they won't get a chance to disappoint each other. That is a gift. Before heading off, Ben shows Cisco how to work the truck, and off Cisco rides down his path. Ben wasn't ready to go into the sea yet, so he feasted and rested and drank beer and rested and feasted and rested and drank beer. He stayed at the villa for a week until he had a dream of Vanessa asking her to come home to him. The next morning he went out to the table, picked up the vial, and downed it. Now here we get the most amazing description of a transformation from man to crab. It is so cool. Now, eventually he gets pulled into the sea and he discovers he can swim like a master, which is what he does. He swims. He stays on the path and he swims. He lives like a crab. He eats the bits of food that fall from above. He doesn't eat much. He hides from predators in the sand. He tunnels through muck to keep himself safe, until one day he gets caught up in a fishing net and finds himself aboard a very strange boat. It's filled with people who have this electronic contraption attached to their arms. Many seem to be watching something midair that only they can see. Otherwise, people were crying and asking each other for food and help, and the sky was filled with this dark gray ash, and Ben felt like the smokers had somehow taken over the world. He wanted to cry, but crabs don't cry. He ended up getting pulled into a sort of tidal wave and then woke up on a beach. Hey you, he says to the 38-year-old Ben. Man, that younger version of him was so annoying. Starting the craft without unmooring it, then trying to unmoor it with the engine on, then going to sleep and leaving a tiny crab in charge of navigation. He's such a dolt. Then, word for word, action for action, Ben relived the time he spent with the crab, only this time he was the crab. He gained a new appreciation for everything Crab had done for him. It wasn't so bad. Only when they got to the replica of Ben's house did Crab feel some sadness. In his mind, he knew that the path was now home. That his home was now former. Eventually, he waved goodbye to younger Ben and passed through the barrier, hoping he was close to the end. He should have known better. He traveled on his tiny little crab legs. They were growing stiff. His eyesight was going. He seemed to cover no more than a few feet of ground in a day. But he continued forward, through rain and through thunderstorms, through the brutal heat of the sun, until one day he walked into a wooden leg. A familiar voice asked him if he would like to become human again. It was Mrs. Blackwell. He was confused. He had a headache. He didn't know what day it was. Mrs. Blackwell told him that he was running out of time, and he was going to be dead of dehydration in a moment if he didn't answer her question. Yes. Yes. Of course, yes. The answer is yes. She popped a cork and poured a cool liquid on him, instructing him to drink it up. Another description of transformation as Ben turned back into a human. Blackwell told him to drink and get dressed. He was pissed. He was done being told what to do by this damn path. But as he started to protest, one of the dog faces appeared from under the table. Blackwell instructed him to sit and listen so she could tell him what comes next. Behind Mrs. Blackwell is a train. There's a red caboose at the back with a fenced-in porch for viewing. The caboose was coupled with a series of 6 rail coaches, a sleeper car, a cafe car, a quiet car, a first-class car, and 2 standard passenger cars. At the front was a single diesel locomotive. She told Ben that the train would take him to the producer. He had persevered enough to get this chance. So his choice was the train to the producer, or he could pick the gun up from the table, step off the path, and kill him. Why would he do that? She tells him that she cannot say how long he will be on the train. It could be 15 minutes. It could be years. But once on the train, he will be on the path and will not be able to die, not even of old age. Ben thinks about it and decides that death lasts a really long time. So no, he won't kill himself today. But he is going to take the gun so that when he gets to the producer, he can shoot him. On the train, he finds that it's empty, except for the dining car. The clerk from the hotel is standing behind the bar. He tells Ben that no one is driving the train, and if he wants anything, to just let the clerk know. Then Ben runs down the length of the train, hits his head, and passes out. When he wakes up, he's 10. It's the morning when his father said that they were going to go to the amusement park. That without Mom, Ben would be able to ride the roller coaster. But Ben protested. His father reminded him every time they went, they would stand in line for 2 hours, and then Ben would chicken out at the last minute. His father said he wasn't going to let that happen today. Then he told Ben that if he just pretended like he was the one driving the roller coaster, the fear would fall away. That if he just imagined being the one to turn the car or to flip it upside down, switches your perspective enough that the scary becomes fun. Even though Ben remembers crying while sitting in that seat next to his father, he also remembers about halfway through that ride, when he started to lean into the turns, how he imagined pressing the afterburner button so that they would travel even faster. His father was right. Afterwards, his father would apologize for making him cry. He would admit to being a crappy dad, and Ben would admit that he knew his father had been drinking all day. Then he tells his son that everything bad can be flipped around into something good. When Ben woke up, something inside him had shifted. The apathy was gone. The burning need to get back to his family was back at full intensity. When the clerk came to tell him it was time to come back inside, he punched the man's face in. He demanded to know how to get to the engine room. The clerk tells him how to get there and repeats that no one is driving the train. Ben says, "That's over now," and the clerk says the producer will not allow him. But Ben cuts him off and says, "I'm the producer." The clerk smiles and says, "Now you're getting it." Ben walks back through the train car towards the engine. About halfway, he runs into one of the dog faces. Without skipping a beat, he knocks the man to the floor in a heap and keeps moving forward. He gets onto the top of the train and sees that there is a glass barrier between him and the engine car. He also sees that there is now a smoker on top of the train car with him. But he's not worried. He inhales the smoker and then exhales him into the glass barrier that melts and solidifies so that Ben can step into the engine room. He pulls the throttle until the train starts to lift off the tracks and heads into the skies. What follows is a psychedelic trip through space and time, ending with Ben sitting in a white room with no windows or doors, and 2 black lines of the path stretched out ahead of him. Sitting across from him is Mrs. Blackwell. that he's different. He's not 48 anymore. He's 38. His hands that were worn from 10 years of hard labor, they're gone. And there's something in his pocket. A hotel room key. An actual key. At first, Mrs. Blackwell tries to tell him to wait for the producer. He says, I am the producer. She says, you are, and it's very cool that you figured that out, but you're actually waiting now for the executive producer. But Ben sees that there's a Sharpie on the table, and instead of waiting, gets up and draws a door on the wall. Then he walks through it, bidding goodbye to Mrs. Blackwell. Inside is a wood-lined office, and a man sits at a desk. He congratulates Ben, and Ben threatens to kill him. But no, he is the one obstacle that Ben cannot get around. He tells Ben to sit because he knows he has questions. Ben just wants to know when and how he can get home. But first he asks, why was he chosen? The executive producer says he's just a consultant, that the path chose Ben. Everything was his own making. The dog faces, they were because of the Rottweiler that had mauled him as a boy. Every dream, hope, fear was used to create the path just for him. Voris, from his childhood journals. Pheromona, standard obstacle for all. Cisco, bit of an overlap. But wasn't your chemistry great? But there's no answer to why. But there is now a final choice. Because there are two doors. One will return Ben to his life the very day he left. The other is a kind of heaven. You stay on the path. You mold it into anything you want. Invent the flying car. Make love with your wife 5 times a day. Or make $1 billion. Your children will be perfectly behaved, and you'll have everything you've ever dreamed of. He stands. I want what I had. The producer is shocked. Why would you want that? He protests. He says, you know, the visions that you had while you were a crab, the one of the boat, of those people, of that future, that's real. That's coming. It could be your future. It could be what you return to. But it's Ben's choice to make. There is one more caveat to returning to his life. He can never, ever tell anyone about this. He can never talk to anyone about it at all. And even if you consider telling someone, your heart will instantly explode. And that will be that. They debated. Ben debated himself. The producer said that maybe nothing was real, that his old life may be just as much of a fantasy as the path. Was it really better to go back? Could he really find happiness if he was without his family? He didn't know what to do until he finally had an idea. While he was on the path, he could do anything he wanted, and he could not die. Standing there in the executive producer's office, he was still on the path. So he picked up the letter opener. It was sitting on the large desk, and he jammed it into his forehead. He cut down the length of his body, then up and around the back of his body. There's no wound. Instead, from outside of him came another Ben. When he was complete, the two Bens stood in front of the desk. Then he turned to the executive producer and announced that he will be taking both doors. The two Bens shook hands and headed in different directions. Ben found himself back at the hotel in the Poconos. He raced to his room, called Teresa, telling her he would be back tonight. She said, really? I mean, you just got there, but, okay, I mean, the kids will be loved to see you, and, I don't like sleeping not next to you, so this is great. And then she asks him if they should wait to have dinner with him. She's making crab cakes. Ben tells her to eat without him. Driving home, he ran into traffic, but it didn't matter. He was the most serene driver that day. At one point, he saw a sign for Cisco and smiled. Then a sign for Pheromona Drive, and he laughed out loud. Finally, he pulled up to his home. When he went inside, he was mobbed by his children. It was wonderful. Then there was Teresa. She stopped as she headed towards him, Something was different. She asked if he was okay, and when he said he was, she knew he was lying. They looked at each other. Ben remembered that time she had come home from work and had been nearly inconsolable. She was 38 when that happened. They looked at each other. "Oh my God," she said. They fell into each other's arms, but didn't say a word. They couldn't. And this is where the book ends. I know this was so long, but it was just such a cool adventure, and I feel like this is one of those books that you could like discuss, like the meaning behind everything, but you can also just take it as the adventure that it is and just enjoy it as the adventure that it is, and take that cool thing that, oh my gosh, Teresa has had the same experience that he has, and that they both made the same choice to come back, but at the same time he also made this other choice to go, and like who knows what that other Ben is doing, and like there's all those possibilities and choices, and I just thought it was really neat, and it really did remind me of Alice in Wonderland or Dorothy and Oz. It was much more mature. I mean, people swore, and there was alcohol and mention of sex and stuff, so it was a more mature story. It wasn't really a kid-friendly story, but it definitely, you go on this path and you learn some things and you get back to yourself and you know more, and I absolutely adored it. And it took me forever to get this up because I literally had to read it. I think I read it 3 or 4 times by the time it was all through, so that I could be sure to not mess up any of the really important stuff. And it was just such a neat story. And I listened to it as well, and the Audible, the person who read the Audible was so good. Great different voices, great. I mean, it was so cool the way Crab sounded like Ben, but deeper. Like, it was just, I adored it. It was great. And I highly suggest, if you haven't read it, that you check it out. Although now you know, well, not everything. I always leave a couple of things out. So if you read it or listen to it yourself, you will get, there'll be at least a few things that'll surprise you and excite you. But if you're still here, thank you. I'd really appreciate a like or a comment or a boost, or if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it. It's very, very helpful, and it's a really easy way for you to support my channel. Other than that, do me a favor and be kind to yourself. You are the only self you're going to get. You are both precious and important, and tomorrow needs you. So stick around. I'll catch you next time. Bye. He decides to look for a path anyway, and quickly finds a gruff blue little, about a dozen extra water balls, about a water, the castle drawbridge, the castle, Teresa had insisted on taking him to the jiu-jitsu. The far wall is covered in a silver, rank, and small, and hit the like illusions from the Phantom Toll booth. When he opened it, he took Ben over to a tray, and standing there in the executive